Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this panel session, which is Women in Inclusive Peace Building, a conversation with Nigerian and Sudanese women activists. Unfortunately, Faye Kemi Abudu is not able to join, but we're here with our other amazing panelists. And as soon as possible, Aisha Yasufu should be logging on. She's just having technical difficulties. So our first speaker I'd like to introduce is Ala Salah. She's a Sudanese activist protester who led protests against the then President al-Bashir and is currently an architecture student. And our next panelist is Razan El-Shazali. She's the founder of the Women of Sudan, an online platform dedicated to celebrating and highlighting the achievements of Sudanese women throughout history. And Aisha Yasufu is a proud Nigerian activist and businesswoman who co-founded the Bring Back Our Girls movement, as well as was a key activist in the End SARS movement. So I think it would be helpful to just explain really what all these different movements we'll be talking about in this session were. There was the Bring Back Our Girls movement in 2014, which was as a response to over 200 Chibok girls in northern Nigeria being kidnapped by Boko Haram. And as a result, Nigerians took to the streets and protesting that the government should help return these girls back to their families, and it gained momentum. And through the use of Twitter and social media, became a really well-known mass movement. And then we'll also be talking about the Sudan Revolution of 2018 to 2019, which was just spurred really because life was hard. The quality of life was hard for Sudanese people. For example, you'd have hospitals with no oxygen or no medicine. In banks, there were no reservoirs for money. There was no fuel. Life was just hard. It was a lot and rife. And so economic reasons really were that final straw for a lot of people from Sudan. And eventually people took to the streets to demand for change and the overthrow of, like I said, then al-Bashir, the president. And then finally, the End SARS movement, which took place in 2020 in Nigeria. And this was a series of mass protests against police brutality in the country. And it called for the disbanding of the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, so AKA SARS. And mass demonstrations occurred throughout major cities in Nigeria, and it was accompanied by huge outrage across the world and in the diaspora. So I'd like to start with Ala. So some of you might not know, but Ala was just a university student like me when the Sudanese Revolution broke out in 2018. And I'd like to just insert an image of her protesting. I don't know if the team can insert this. Okay, it'll be coming shortly, but anyways, if there was this image of her that went viral of her standing on a car in Khartoum as a form of protest against al-Bashir. And Ala, I'd just like for you to start by telling us your story. Why did you mount that car? What did it represent? And how has your life changed as a result of that in 2019?
Hi everyone. بداية أنا حابة أترحم على أرواح شهداء الثورة السودانية، وبتمنى عاجل الشفاء للمصابين وعاجل العودة للمفقودين. بداية من إنه كيف إحنا شاركنا، أول حاجة اللي خلتنا نطلع شنو إحساسنا وإحنا في السودان بإنه السودان اللي إحنا كنا عايشين فيه في الفترة بتاعت مثلا 2019 2018 الوضع اللي خلانا نطلع للثورة. القصص اللي كنا بنسمعها من آبائنا عن السودان زمان كان كيف، والحاجة اللي إحنا عايشينها في اليوم كانت مختلفة تماماً. فالحاجة دي بتخليك جواك تساؤلات، إذا هو زمان في القرن الماضي السودان كان مزدهر وكان بالنماء ده، فهل في الألفينات الوضع اللي إحنا عايشين فيه كان مقبول بالنسبة لنا؟ أبداً، الإجابة لا. الحاجة الثانية بالنسبة الوضع الاقتصادي والوضع الصحي، تدهور الصحة والتعليم والوضع الاقتصادي بصورة عامة في السودان. الحاجة دي أججت للصراع جوانا، بس بنلقى إنه الثورة في حد ذاتها كانت نتيجة لفعل تراكمي جوا قلوبنا. يعني إحنا يوم عن يوم الثورة كانت جوانا بتكبر لحد ما كانت الانطلاقة بتاعتها في 2018 في ديسمبر، لكن بنلقى إنها هي كانت بذرة جوانا وبتنمو يوم بعد يوم. وما كانت أول ثورة لجيلنا إحنا تحديداً، يعني اللي هو الجيل اللي اتولد في فترة حكم عمر البشير اللي هي استمرت لفترة 30 سنة. إحنا مما قمنا شايفين عمر البشير، ما شفنا أي رئيس غيره، أو في تغيير في الحكومة، أو في إصلاح في البلد أو كده. فكان في 2013 نفس الجيل اللي طلع في 2018 كان في ثورة في 2013. الحصل إنه إحنا استفدنا من تجربتنا في 2013 في إننا كيف نقدر نتواصل مع بعض، كيف نقدر نخطط مع بعض، كيف نقدر نتوحد عشان ما إنه نصل بثورتنا لبر الأمان.
Hi, my name is Ruba. I'm just going to be translating for Ala. So basically, the first thing that Ala wants to do is give her condolences to those who have lost their lives in the revolution in Sudan. Going back to the revolution and how everything started, there's saying that the revolution has kind of been ignited in everybody way before 2018 with the strife and the struggle of just basic living in Sudan. And so 2018 was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. And then everybody came out and they protested. This was also not the first revolution to happen under Umar al-Bashir. So the generation that was part of the 2018 revolution has been, all of them known as Umar al-Bashir, who has been president or dictator for the past 30 years. And so the first revolution was actually in 2013. And so what the revolution in 2018 was able to do was learn from the trials and errors from the revolution in 2013 in order to have a more successful revolution and to kind of band together for a better revolution and for better outcomes. So she's also saying that the Sudan that we know now and the Sudan that existed during our parents' time is very different. The Sudan that existed during our parents' time is a lot better and is considered to be a lot better. Have a Sudan at that time, why can't we have a Sudan like that now? You know, why can't our generation live in that kind of Sudan now? And to kind of see the discrepancies between the two Sudans, everybody kind of understood that there was something wrong. There was something that was happening that wasn't right. And that thing that was happening that wasn't right was the government. And so the Sudanese people came together in the streets and they protested against Umar al-Bashir. And that's kind of what made the Sudanese Revolution what it is today.
كمان من الأسباب الأساسية اللي خلتنا كمان نطلع السياسات اللي كانت متبعة، السياسات اللي اتخذها النظام السابق في السودان لخلق الصراعات والنزاعات وللحد من حرية الأشخاص ومن أصواتهم، وبالأخص بنتكلم عن السياسات ضد النساء في السودان. كانت يعني سياسات جائرة جدا، حدد من حقوقهم ومن حركتهم ومن أصواتهم بصورة كانت يعني فيها اضطهاد للنساء. فدي برضو من الأسباب اللي خلتنا إننا نرفض الوضع اللي كان حاصل ونكسر القمع اللي كان واضعنا فيه النظام السابق ونسور على النظام أولا. يعني بنلقى إنه النساء في السودان كانوا أكثر من 65% من المتظاهرين هم كانوا نساء، في الوقت اللي إنه النساء هم أكثر فئة اتكوت بنار وسياسات النظام السابق. فلما حسينا إنه في وقت إحنا قادرين إننا نعبر فيه عن حقنا، إحنا قادرين إننا نرد فيه كرامتنا وحقوقنا ونحفظها، طلعنا على الشارع طوالي الثورة في الخطوط عشان إحنا عندنا حق عايزين نسترده.
But what Ala really wants to highlight is the importance of women in this movement, and specifically women's rights and what this movement has represented for women's rights in Sudan. And so women have generally been oppressed by the Sudanese government. But during the revolution, they made up more than 65% of the protesters and the leaders of the revolution. And that really is to showcase that this is their time. They've kind of bared the blunt of the Sudanese government. They've been the ones who have been the most affected. And so when this revolution came, it became their time to go out in the streets and claim the streets for themselves, to claim their voices, and to really give the revolution and the protests the feelings that they were having, and the genuinity that was in their hearts, and to really just lead the revolution in a way that would benefit women in Sudan and that would further women's rights in Sudan as well.
Okay, thank you so much. I'd like to just move on to Razan now. Could you briefly explain to us as well how you got started with Women of Sudan? What inspired you to decide, even though you're all the way in the UK, you wanted to help your fellow Sudanese back at home? So why do you decide to get involved in activism as well?
Yes, assalamu alaikum. It's nice to see you guys, and thank you to everyone watching. I think that's a really good question. Unfortunately, it's going to have to come back to, quarantine. I don't want to remind anyone of those times. But so it was around March or April of 2020. We're all stuck in our houses. And I was thinking about what I was saying earlier about this idea of Sudan Zaman, like what Sudan used to be like. Because this is, as you said, something that we've been taught about from our parents and our grandparents about, how progressive Sudan used to be in history. How, for example, if we're looking at women used to have a role in society. Sudan was one of the countries with the first female doctors, the first female lawyers, the first female judges, which was something that you wouldn't really see in the region at that time. So I was thinking, how come why don't we talk about this enough? Because even in Sudan, we might know it and we might talk about it. It's not something that is accessible maybe to the diaspora who live abroad, who don't really speak Arabic, or just non-Sudanese people in general who are interested in history. So there are a lot of accounts, I think, that is similar for like women in the Levant region or women in Egypt. And that's something that I would like follow. And I would say like, okay, why doesn't Sudan have something like this? So that's really like how it got started. It got started looking at, the role of women in the past. And from there on, it kind of grew to look at, current issues that were happening. I started in 2020, but still there were like revolutions and protests happening. And specifically, I would say, in the past few months, I lived in Qatar, but I moved to the UK about a few months ago for university. And that's when sort of the revolution was happening. More recently, the protests were happening. And that was probably the busiest that my account has ever been, because it was people messaging me saying like, oh, we're in California, we want to do a protest, like, can you post about it? Or people sending me photos from, protests in Norway and Germany and things like things I never even thought about. Like, whoa, Sunnis people exist everywhere. That's really crazy. But yeah, so from then on, it was people that were in the diaspora who you sort of feel helpless when you're living abroad. You feel like, oh, my people back home are going through so many things and I can't do anything, when that really isn't the case. And it's not really the fact that like there's this idea of giving a voice to the voiceless. That's not what it is. That's not true. People in Sudan do have a voice, but it's the idea of like amplifying that and using your privilege to talk about things, especially in Sudan where people are going through internet blackouts or electricity blackouts or curfews. They can't get out, but what they can do is sometimes communicate with their family abroad, and then that's us, and we can post about that and talk about that. And I think specifically in 2019 with the Blue for Sudan movement, I've never seen anything on that scale, and that was the work of people outside who had access to the internet when people in Sudan couldn't. So I think
Thank you. Just kind of building on that and moving on from that, the whole social media and the role that played, especially you being in the diaspora and other Africans, I'm sure, being in the diaspora. That your account, for instance, has 11K followers on Instagram, I'm pretty sure. And so it's clear that social media has been a tool in the helping of these movements. For example, just all the hashtags that have come with these movements, like with Sudan, it was hashtag Blue for Sudan. In my own country, Nigeria, we saw like hashtag Bring Back Our Girls, hashtag EndSARS. So clearly these hashtags helped to garner international recognition. And I just want to ask this, either of you can respond to this really. So do you think social media is what primarily gave these movements life? Is it what fueled them, or it just helped facilitate something that was already in the works? It just helped to, not to repeat myself, but it just helped to get even bigger? Or was social media the sole reason that, you know what, that's why we all got to know about it? Without Twitter, Instagram, all that, they wouldn't have been such movements that we can now talk about today. So whoever would like to respond to that first.
احنا السوشيال ميديا بالنسبه لنا في الثوره كانت واحد من اسلحتنا اللي احنا استخدمناها عشان نحارب بها. في وقت من الاوقات الوقت اللي عرفنا فيه انه السوشيال ميديا دي بقت مؤثره لما الحكومه بقت بتقطع النت تماما عننا، فقدرنا نعرف انه قدر شنو السوشيال ميديا خلقت جواهم خوف وجواهم رعب، لانه احنا رسائلنا قادرين نوصلها عن خلال السوشيال ميديا. احنا قادرين نتقابل ونخطط ونطلع المواكب ونطلع المليونات من خلال السوشيال ميديا. في 2018 ديسمبر 2019 شهري 1 و2 و3 كنا بنستخدم التلفون عشان نعرف البلان، الخطة اللي حنتخذها عشان نطلع الشارع، حيبدأ من وين الموكب، حينتهي وين نقاط التجمع. كل التفاصيل اللي احنا كانت بتخلينا نكون مترابطين مع بعض كانت بتتم من خلال السوشيال ميديا. هي كانت إعلامنا، وهي كانت صوتنا، وهي كانت يعني الحاجة اللي من خلالها إحنا قادرين نعبر عن رسائلنا. فحسينا في إنه السوشيال ميديا هي بجد قادرة توصل رسالتنا للعالم، مش بس كمان إنها داخل السودان، للعالم. نشوف هاشتاج بلو فور سودان اللي هو كان في شهر 6 2019. الوقت ده كان النت كان مقطوع من السودان، فالهاشتاج ده كان هو من العالم للسودان، عكس كل مرة بكون الهاشتاجات ممكن من السودان عشان العالم يعرف عن الحاصل في السودان. بس في شهر 6 2019 بلو فور سودان بعد فض اعتصام ومجزرة القيادة العامة اللي حصلت يوم 29 رمضان 2019 ماتوا فيها أكثر من 200 شهيد. عندنا حالات بتاعت اغتصاب واعتداء للنساء وللرجال، عندنا حالات بتاعت مفقودين هم لحد اليوم ما معروفين هم وين. فبلو فور سودان كان تضامن من العالم مع الشعب السوداني ومع الثوار في السودان. دي حاجة كانت مهمة شديد. برضو على سبيل المثال الصورة اللي فيها أنا، يعني كيف قدرت تصل للعالم، كيف قدرت توحد آرائهم، كيف قدرت تلفت أنظارهم لأنه في حاجة في السودان، لأنه في ثورة عظيمة في السودان. فده بنلقى إنه السوشيال ميديا هي قادرة تخدم في إنها توصل الرسائل للعالم، قادرة تربط كل الناس مع بعض، وقادرة ترعب الحكومات أيضا.
If you could go on.
Yes. So social media was basically the weapon that the citizens in Sudan used to fight against the government. It joined everyone together. It allowed for them to plan the actual movements of and the parts of the revolution that were happening. It was used as a news medium as well, just to spread news within Sudan and around the world as well. And for the longest time, social media was used for people of the revolution to convey their message and to convey news to the world. Up until June 6th, at that time, the roles were reversed. And it was during that time that the government had shut down all of the internet in Sudan. And so in that sense, it was more of the world communicating the news to Sudan, and the world kind of taking, and the Sudanese diaspora outside of Sudan as well, kind of taking that responsibility to continue and spread that message when the people on the ground couldn't do so because they couldn't access internet. And so it really is because of the internet that the news of the revolution, surpassed just the citizens of Sudan within Africa, and the whole world was able to see it. And even with the hashtag Blue for Sudan, and seeing everybody change their profiles to blue as well, kind of shows you that unification of the masses. And that was really because of social media, in times where even people on the ground couldn't really spread the news themselves. They could rely on others outside of the country to do that for them.
Thank you for that. I know that definitely with the case of Nigeria, Twitter was essential for that because, for example, during NSAS, I was actually in London, still at LSE University, and without social media, I don't think it would have garnered as much support, and it really connected Nigerians as well to know that this is what's going on in my country on ground. And so to see that international communities were, against what was going on, it was just nice to see and really helped know that, Nigerians around are supporting the Nigerians. So, yes. Hi, Aisha. Can you hear us?
Hello. Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you so much. If you could just turn your camera on. Okay, great. So, Aisha, well, and actually, I think I'd like to ask you a question. We were talking about how the role social media has had on these movements. And if you could just focus on Nigeria, do you think both the Bring Back Our Girls movement and both NSAS would have had the momentum it did without the role of Twitter, Instagram? Like, what role did it play on the movement in Nigeria? Thank you.
Oh, okay. So thank you so much. First of all, I'm a bit shaken up because, you forgot that your time was going to change. Mine wasn't going to change. 3:30 GMT is my 4:30. So at the time you sent me an email, UK hadn't adjusted their time. So I was waiting for like the next time. So that's why I didn't join. So apologies for joining. Even though it's not my fault, but I'm feeling lucky I caught on the email. So coming back to the question on the issue of social media, I would say during the NSAS protest, social media played a huge part, tremendous part in the role on getting people's voices out there. So before this NSAS protest, I was part of the Bring Back Our Girls movement. Bring Back Our Girls movement was actually a movement that started on Twitter with the first tweet going out, and that was in April 2014. And so it helped. It helped to send the word around to the whole world that indeed something was happening. And coming back to NSAS protest again, it was the same thing. So I would like to say this. What social media has done is that it has democratized media. In those days where the government, especially dictatorial government, had access to, were the only ones who controlled media and what was being said, and they can shut down the voices of whether electronic or print media that didn't support what they were doing. They can close down offices. They couldn't do that with social media. And everybody had media at their access, and they could use it for good or bad. And you can just simply stay in one place and just beam to the world what was happening in your country that your government didn't want anybody to see. And so beyond that access, democratizing media and putting media at the hands of everyone. And there was also a situation whereby you can actually talk back to government. In those days, what you had was a government to come and tell you what they needed to hear. When I was a child, 7 a.m. in the morning, 9 p.m. at night, the military government will tell you what they wanted you to hear, and that was it. But here, not only were they the ones who were putting out the narrative, people also had the opportunity with social media to be able to put out the narrative. So they were able to set the agenda. So in public policy making, the first thing is setting agenda. And so people also had that to set. And that was what happened with the NSAS protest. And so with the NSAS protest, they could tweet it, they could meet online, they could ask themselves, this was what they were going to do, and they could also organize online. They could crowdsource for funds online. And so social media played a tremendous part in the NSAS protest and a lot of other protests in Nigeria.
Thank you very much. I just want to move on to another topic. So these spurs that we see every few years across the continent, with Bring Back Our Girls started 2014, and then NSAS in 2020. Do you think that these rallying of people, we've seen any effective change? Because like I said, with the 2014 Bring Back Our Girls, that was a call to improve security from external actors such as terrorist extremist groups. And then in 2020 was the culmination of much more annoyance with the government, poor security, and yet people are still going out to protest and demand for change. So do you really think there's been effective change when we look at things like, are you fine?
Okay, yeah. So yeah, absolutely. There has been tremendous change. One of the things that we must understand is the fact that protests are never going to stop. We'll continue to have protests all throughout life, no matter how good things are. But the thing is that on what are you protesting for? That's the issue right now. For some of us in our countries, we are still protesting for mundane things that shouldn't be. You know, when, for example, the NSAS protest was basically a protest saying to the Nigerian youth, we're saying to the Nigerian government, stop killing us. Your men are killing us. Can you tell them to stop? How do you, in 2020, you're still protesting to be allowed your right to live? So in that case, it's different from somebody who is coming out to say, oh, we are protesting against climate change. You have to be alive to protest against climate change. We don't even have the luxury to be protesting on things like, oh, climate change, or don't bring down this tree, when people are being brought down themselves. So in terms of the effectiveness of the protest, absolutely, they've been very effective. They've ensured that the issue of NSAS protest was brought to the fore. It became part of the agenda. They had to look into it. Are we saying that police they stop their brutality? No. Is it that people are not still being killed? No. No, people are still being killed. But the impunity with which they were killed before, and the government gave a blind eye, it's not as much as it was then. In the case of the Bring Back Our Girls, also, Chibok girls, over 100 Chibok girls have been brought back. Without the Bring Back Our Girls being on the street using social media and also physical protests, they wouldn't have been brought back. The issue of the atrocities being meted out in the northeastern part of Nigeria, where the Boko Haram insurgency, terrorist attack were really taking place, was brought to the fore of the world. The world actually realized something like this was happening because of the protests and because of the social media that had gone out. And one of the things, the kind of government that we have, sadly, are governments that, and I think Sudan probably also share that, are governments that they do not care about the voices of their people. They do not care whether we protest or not. They do not care whether we're on the street. But the moment the world outside, especially the Western government, pay attention or look towards it, then they will see them actually begin to do something. And that's what the social media has done for us. And let me give you a quick example of that was last year, 2021, the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria had done a tweet that was genocidal, threatening a certain group of Nigerians about the 1967 treatment. 1967 was when Nigerian Civil War started, and millions of people were killed. And so when he did that, a lot of Nigerians, we were not happy, and we talked about it, and Twitter took down the tweet. And guess what now happened? What they did was they banned Twitter in Nigeria. So when Twitter was banned in Nigeria, we had to use a VPN to begin to access Twitter. And the unintended outcome of that was that we now realize as Nigerians that with our VPN, whatever issues that we were tweeting about, they started trending all over the world. Because Nigeria, we have a population of over 200 million people. And out of that 200 million people, quite a number, I think about 60 to 70 million are on social media. And some of the good number of that use Twitter. And so when millions of people are tweeting about the same thing from different countries, because our VPN, we now have to be accessing it from different countries. And so you find out that Nigerian issues will be trending on other places, and that tells you the power of social media. So yes, effectiveness is there. For example, let me give you an example of the NSAS protest. A lot of panels were set up. A lot of people have gotten justice that they're looking for. A lot of people have gotten compensation in terms of even the politics. By 2023, Nigeria is going to go to the polls. Nigerians are going to vote for the presidential election. Election is coming up. NSAS is still it's an election topic. So without all of this, nobody would have bothered about what was happening to people. And the most important thing that has come out of the NSAS protest is that Nigerian citizens, the youths, who ordinarily do not care about politics, they never participate, they don't care, they're doing their own thing, they are now more aware. They are interested in politics, they are interested in governance, they are interested in who becomes the leader, and they are evolving into this powerful force that hopefully in the next few years, we see them being the ones that become the game changers of the politics of this nation, of Nigeria.
Thank you very much. Definitely. I would say that point you made about how the youth now are more interested in politics and our leaders, I think that's definitely the case, because even amongst my friends, they're now more like, because they're aware of what's going on in Nigeria, they saw the NSAS protest tweets happening live. They're now like, we need to hold accountable the leaders we have, because if we don't, these are the repercussions that happen to all of us. So just moving on from that, focus on you again, Aisha. These protests and movements we've had in Nigeria, women have been at the forefront, women like yourselves, other women coming out to demand change. But one question we could focus on is how do we go about trying to get women into the political space and into the political arena? In Nigeria, for instance, in our representatives, we have, correct me if I'm wrong, only 2 women representatives and the rest are all men. So clearly it's showing that women are trying to advocate for these changes, but we're not even in the position to change. So what would you say we should do to go about integrating ourselves more into the political arena? Thank you.
Oh, okay. So first of all, in Nigeria, we've never had a female president. We never had a female vice president. We've never had a female governor. Okay, yeah, we had one when the man had to temporarily step out, and then he came again. We've had a few deputy governors in the National Assembly. We have about 3.something% of women in the legislative arm of government. So yeah, women are. I would just say this: in Nigeria, women are not even seen as citizens; we are seen as slaves. And I'll give you an example why I'm saying this. The National Assembly recently had bills, 5 gender bills that they were supposed to pass on. We're trying to have a bit of a constitution amendment, and they all threw away the bills. And the littlest of them, let me just tell you, it's one that says that, for example, a Nigerian man, when he marries a woman who is not Nigeria, he can confer on his wife, his spouse, the citizenship of Nigeria. And so the bill was saying Nigerian women also want to have that opportunity when they marry men who are not Nigeria, for them to be able to confer that citizenship. And it was that, as little as that, was thrown away. So that tells you where Nigerian women are placed. But then when it comes to politics, in terms of who are the people who vote the most, who are the people that are used in party activities when they're doing campaigns and all of that, women are the ones that are at the top. But when it comes to politics, in terms of being at the seat of power, in terms of political participation that will lead to women being in position of power, women are nowhere to be found. And it's something that it's not just, it just didn't start here. It started from right before even the woman was born. I mean, we have cases where women are killed just because they are pregnant with women. We have cases where women are abandoned in their hospitals just because they gave birth to girls. Sorry, they are pregnant with girls. We have a situation where women are abandoned in hospital because they gave birth to girls. You find out that sometimes girls are not allowed to go to school in certain places just because they are girls. And even when you sometimes you are educated, you have the degree, but your husband does not want you to work. So there are a lot of things that are limiting. And so women have been conditioned to believe that they are not supposed to be in leadership position, right? So that condition is something that is so hard to fight. In terms of advocacy, you see a lot of women in advocacy in Nigeria. Most social movements that have really worked, we're talking about Bring Back Our Girls movement, you're talking about the NSAS protest, you're talking about the Aba riot, women protest, you're talking about the Egba women protest. This Aba, I think it's over 70 years now that happened. These were protests that changed the nation, and they were done by women. Protests and civil social movements are still being done by a lot of women. But when it comes to politics, you now see that there's a difference. Why? Even right now, a lot of people when there's a protest, they are looking for women Where the women, we should go out and protest for them. But when it comes to the issue of power, they don't want women to be there. So we have a little bit of problem where we've been brought up to believe that we're the ones to serve. We shouldn't be in a position of power. We shouldn't aspire to be there. Just serve, just be good. So you find a lot of women are ready to be in advocacy and sacrifice, but when it comes to political involvement, where it now there's a bit of power attached to it that we come, women are shy away because we have been conditioned to believe that we shouldn't do that. No, don't spoil your name, don't fear your name. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to ensure that, look, women, at the end of the day, being good is not going to take us anywhere. Being silent is not going to take us anywhere. Oh, don't confront them. Be nice to them. It's not going to take us anywhere. And right now, we're trying to tell our fellow women to say that, look, when we sit down on the street, we're fighting for good governance. We're not really fighting for every one of us. We're fighting for them. They get in there and they sideline of the trust away. So we too are important now, and we need to begin to focus on issues that have to be gender related. I personally have made up my mind that the election is going to be about gender. Gender is going to be most of my kids. I'm going to be looking for who are the female candidates, who are the ones that are running. I'm going to give attention to them because we want more women in office so that they'll be able to, first of all, take up the women issue, not for it to be thrown away. And let me just also add that on the floor of the Senate, a senator actually stood up and said that the women are not equal to men. But when they are counting our votes, they don't make our votes to be heard. So we have to be deliberate and remove that mindset that where they tell us we have the position of power. And yes, there are a lot of things that, that sort of like stop women from aspiring in terms of, politics is about power, it's about money, it's about, that networking. And most women don't have that economic power per se, because a lot of women are controlled by their men. Some of them are stopped from running their businesses. They are told that it won't look good on them. There are also, for example, I'll give you a quick example. A young woman who is not married, who is working, has a job, she has money, she'll be told not to buy a car. Simply because if she buys a car, no man is going to marry her. So you see how limited, if you have a business that is successful, they will say to you, oh, don't be too successful. Otherwise, people will say, as a woman, you shouldn't be that. But what we are trying to do now is to encourage more women to be, to aspire and aim to be in political position and also political participation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. That is so inspiring and so true. Just take it back to more on the ground, the movements, protests as well on the ground. I'd like to direct this question to Ala. Whilst you were in Sudan during the revolution, did you find that generally people were willing to come out and protest? Was it difficult to convince people to believe this was worth fighting for, even if their lives would have been at risk by perhaps the rapid support force of the military? So what would you have to say to that?
الوضع في السودان بالنسبة لإنك تطلع على الشارع، تطلع على المواكب، دي حاجة إحنا ما مخيرين فيها، دي حاجة إحنا مؤمنين بها، إنه إحنا من خلال المواكب ومن خلال الشارع إحنا قادرين إننا نحدث التغيير، قادرين نصل. يعني إحنا أول يوم طلعنا فيهم كان عندنا قضية مؤمنين بها تماماً ولازم نحققها، الحرية والسلام والعدالة. دي الحاجات طالما إحنا فينا نفس حنطلع كل يوم عشان نحقق الحاجة دي، ومش عشان نفسنا، عشان الأجيال الجاية يلقوا الوضع اللي إحنا كنا بنحلم به ونحن نأسسه للأجيال الجاية. خصوصاً إنه طالما الإنسان عنده قدرة، عنده صوت وعنده طاقة، قادر إنه يحدث تغيير حالياً، الحاجة دي أثرها حيكون في المستقبل كبير شديد. فأنا كنت بتمنى إنه اللي إحنا بنعمل فيه اليوم ده لو كان اتعمل قبل 30 سنة إحنا ما كنا اضطرينا إننا نعمل اليوم. فعشان الأجيال الجاية ما تحس وما تعيش نفس إحساسنا، ما تعيش نفس التحديات اللي إحنا عايشينها هسه في شبابنا، فإحنا شغالين لهم، إحنا شغالين نأسس لهم. بعدين الفكرة بقت جوانا، إيمان القضية جوانا هو المحركنا، هو المطلعنا الشارع. شهريا عندنا الجدول بيطلع بتاع المواكب والمليونيات اللي بتكون في الشهر. ده موضوع هو بيكون يعني منتهي، أي زول بيكون عارف إنه حيطلع في أي موقف، حيمشي وين، حيمشي مع منو، كل الحاجات دي من بداية الشهر يعني. فونس إنه الناس تطلع على الشارع دي بقت حياتنا إحنا في الشارع، يعني إحنا الشارع هو اللي بيعلمنا، الشارع هو اللي بيأدبنا، الشارع هو اللي بيدينا إحساس إنه إحنا عايشين وإحنا بنعمل في حاجة، مش في خوف من إنك تطلع الشارع. لا، أي نعم الشارع فيه الموت، ولحد اليوم تحديدا من بعد انقلاب 25 أكتوبر 2021 لحد اليوم في أكثر من 80 شهيد وشهيدة، في حالات إصابات كثيرة جدا، في مصابين فقدوا أطرافهم، في إصابات كانت خطيرة، في مفقودين، في معتقلين، وانت طالع الشارع عارف كل الحاجات دي ممكن تحصل لك. عندك قضية حتى كانت تم روحك، احنا طالعين عشان قضيتنا، ممكن نقدم روحنا، وقدموها اخواننا واخواتنا الشهداء رحمة الله عليهم قدامنا يعني.
So to go out and protest in the streets, it wasn't very difficult for many people because there was a common objective that everyone wanted to realize, and that was along the lines of peace and of freedom and of justice within Sudan. And so there was a common message between everyone, and there was a willingness to go out on the streets, and there was everybody knew that there was everyone had the ability to make change. And so the streets became everyone's teacher. It became everyone's, in a way, safe place, even though they knew that what was going on was very dangerous. Ever since 2021, there have been about 80 people who've lost their lives. And so you go out into the streets and you know that there's a possibility that this can be you. But because and the vision for Sudan was so great, this was a sacrifice that a lot of the protesters were willing to make regardless. And so the streets, it's kind of a medium that people use to really realize their objectives and realize their goals and really have a place within the revolution as well. And so every month people would come out and there would be schedules of where to go and who to go with and why you're going into these places. And so if what was being done now was already done 30 years ago, then we wouldn't be out in the streets. The revolution wouldn't be happening. And so the same idea is kind of the reason why these protesters came out in millions, because they don't want the next generation to have to do this again in the future. And so ideally the streets is really where people were able to realize these objectives for themselves and for Sudan as well.
Thank you. And a quick question to Razan. I was just wondering, why do you think we seem to see an epidemic of poor leadership and poor regimes across the continent? Well, with this talk, we're talking about Nigeria and Sudan, so that's quite fitting to see that there is an issue on the continent. So I was just wondering, what were your thoughts on that?
Honestly, that is the $1 million question. And I don't think there's one answer that can be succinct enough or discuss all the rooted issues. But I would say we can look internally, but we can also look externally. If we're looking internally, I would say we do have a lot of corruption and a lot of elitism, and there's not enough access for people to get into politics, whether it's women, whether it's people from ethnic minorities, economic minorities, everything like that. I think it's in Sudan especially, that's what I can speak about, there is an elitism problem. I would assume it's probably the same in Nigeria and across Africa. We have power being in the hands of so few, and power isn't free of coercion, and power isn't free of oppression. And specifically, I'd say in Africa, due to international development and all of this, power is so intertwined with money and wealth and resources. And in Sudan, that's one of the biggest problems, is that our resources aren't in our hands and they're being exploited. And that money is going into the pockets of a few people, and it's going outside of Sudan. That money isn't for us. It's not going anywhere. It's going outside. And then also, if we are to look, at our history, we can't talk about why Africa is the way it is without looking at colonialism and the legacies of that. In Sudan, a lot of it, the conflict between, the South and the North, and, what happened in Darfur, a lot of that can be rooted back to colonialism and British involvement and external powers who are able to empower, specific groups and say, we're going to give, we're going to give the Arabs all the power and all the money, and everyone else, like, you have to follow that. And, that's wrong. And the legacies of that, how many years have passed since that, 80, 70 years, and we're still in that position. And I think as well, it's not just, historic colonialism, it's also the new colonialism that we face. The institutions that we're a part of aren't built for us. The United Nations, the World Trade Organization, all of these treaties, international agencies that we're a part of aren't built for us. And they're actually a means of, creating instability and fueling instability within the region. So I think, for example, for looking at, the Sudanese Civil War, a lot of that can be traced back to the British involvement, and it's just beyond words. So many things have happened, and so many things have been allowed to happen because of money and because of the way the international system is set up against us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have one question that's been inputted specifically for Ala, but could we try and keep the response as short as possible? It goes, in reference to your iconic photo, were you aware at the time when standing on that car and reciting Revolution that this moment would be so striking for the world that was observing the developments in Sudan? When did you become aware of this impact and the power of social media and images?
Can you say again question, please?
Yes, sorry. So the question is, in reference to your iconic photo, were you aware at the time when you were standing on the car and you were reciting Revolution that this moment would be so striking for the world that was observing the developments in Sudan? But could we try and keep this answer short so I can ask you guys all your final words after this?
تفاصيل الصورة في حد ذاتها وقتها كان مختلف شديد. يعني ما وقفت عشان متخيلة إنه في صورة ممكن تحصل من هنا أو في حدث ممكن يحصل من هنا، بل بالعكس. يعني إحنا كنا بنتشارك القصائد الحماسية، بنشارك أحاسيسنا ومشاعرنا وقضيتنا بالهتافات وبالقصائد وبالألحان، يعني في القيادة العامة. ففي لحظة من اللحظات يعني كنت بهتف فيها، أنا هتفت في اليوم ده أكثر من 10 مرات في 10 مناطق مختلفة في محيط القيادة العامة. ما كنت متخيلة إنه في حاجة حتحصل من هنا، بل يعني بعتقد إنه الإيمان بالقضية والأحاسيس وكيف أنا كنت بحكي، يمكن دي الحاجة اللي قدرت توصل الإحساس للعالم من خلال الصورة. لكن دي الحاجة اللي كانت سائدة في محيط القيادة بصورة عامة، إنه في كل ركن، في كل مكان في ناس واقفة بتغني مع بعض، بتهتف مع بعض وبتشارك القصائد دي. فحاجة زي السحر كده، أو حاجة ما متوقعة، بس يعني ربنا أراد إنها تكون الصورة وتوصل للعالم من المكان ذاك، من محيط اعتصام القيادة العامة، اللي هو السبب اللي خلانا نعتصم في القيادة العامة يوم 6 أبريل 2019. يمكن ده المكان اللي هو فيه مباني الجيش. فعلى حسب الشائع إنه الجيش في حماية الشعب عشان يحفظ أمن وأمان الشعب والسودان والبلد يعني. فده كان السبب اللي خلانا كثوار نتوجه يوم 6 أبريل في مليونية في أعداد ضخمة جدا لمحيط اعتصام القيادة العامة، اللي هو في تخيلنا إنه الجيش ممكن يوفر لنا أمان، عكس الحاجة اللي حصلت تماماً، عكس اللي كان متوقع بالنسبة لنا. يعني إحنا الاعتصام اتفضى يوم 3/6/2019 كان في أكثر من 200 شهيد وأحداث كثيرة جدا، اللي هو كان سبب فيها يعني الدعم السريع، جهاز الأمن، كل القوى الأمنية المشتركة هي اللي كانت السبب في الحاجة دي. فده المكان اللي إحنا كنا فيه محيط اعتصام القيادة العامة.
So the circumstances that happened around the picture are quite different than what the perception of it is. During that time, when she got on the car and she kind of delivered that poem, there was no expectation that this is going to basically change the narrative of what was going on in Sudan and essentially be the picture of the revolution in Sudan. During that time, and specifically in that day, she had kind of done the same thing a couple of times. They were making kind of makeshift stages throughout different parts of the neighborhood. And so, it was her or other people who were kind of had that same very emotional moments that they wanted to really share with the rest of the protesters, which is, stand up and share a story or share a chant or share a poem. And so during that moment, she just happened to be with a group of people who emotions were very high, everyone was passionate about what they were protesting for and against. And so she just, got on top of the car and started delivering that poem. And she believes it was the way that she was saying it, and it was the way that it was delivered that really captured the hearts of the people that were there and also the people that were able to listen to it around the world. And, even the protests, where they were doing was in a public place by the military, because the idea was that the number one responsibility of the military is to protect its citizens and to protect everybody. But that realizing later on that was the opposite of what was happening, and it was actually the military that was perpetrating some of the violence. But at the end of the day, what happened, that picture that was taken was not, she never thought it would become as iconic as it is still today.
Hey, thank you very much. And just to wrap up, this is to Aisha and Razan, but what would you say your dream Nigeria or your dream Sudan you'd envision it to be? Just a quick 30 seconds for each of your 1 minute to explain what you'd hope your dream Nigeria or Sudan would look like.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so for me, my dream Sudan would be one of equality. I think I've just brought it up a few times, like the sort of elitism that exists and the idea that like what happens in Khartoum, the capital city, is what matters, but what happens outside, that's none of our business. I want a Sudan that's where minorities around the country and where people, regardless of economic class, regardless of their religion, regardless of their race, regardless of anything like that, are able to participate effectively and meaningfully in politics and culture.
For me, basically, I want a Nigeria where the child of nobody can become somebody without knowing anybody. I want a Nigeria where people are educated, where access to good quality education is not dependent on the economic status of one's family. You asked a question earlier about democracy. Why do we have bad leaders across the continent? Basically, because there is no proper education, and democracy without education is actually a disaster. We have a situation where a lot of people are not educated, so their illiteracy is being weaponized. We have a situation where a lot of people have been thrown into poverty, and then their poverty is monetized by the politicians, and they keep perpetuating themselves in office. I look forward to a continent, really, because Africa is just like a country. What happens in one part is what is happening in other parts in terms of the negative indices, and these are the things that we must change. And for us to be able to change that, the women in Africa must be in the position of equality with the men in Africa, because you cannot rule a nation with half of your population being put down. Because what we are trying to do as a continent is like it's somebody who is trying to walk with one leg when you actually have two legs. Half of the population is being put down, and that's not fair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, speakers. It was so lovely having you all here, and I hope all our attendees enjoyed this session. Thank you so much, Aisha, for joining when you did, and thank you to Razan and Alan. Thank you so much, Ruba, for translating. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.